I was going to turn to you in there to talk about quality and defects. It probably goes without saying, but still needs to be said, that doing something right and doing it right first time is always going to be cheaper than having to go back and sort it out afterwards. So this must be something that you see a lot of, good and bad.
Very, very much so. And I think it's one of those things that there's no doubt in my mind that there's a link between payment, cash flow, and quality. You could argue such like if you're saying, I get a $10 out, I'm not asking someone to build this badly. I'm asking you to build it right and build it with quality, so it should be expected. But the reality of it is that cash and such like and time has a major impact on the ability to do things properly on the site. And there's almost an acceptance at the end of the day that when you get towards the practical completion, such like you're asking for a list of snagging items and defect items. And I think this is an area where I think you potentially get off on the wrong foot at that point. That sometimes issues are put in place, or there's time constraints that effectively make the moving into the building the priority over actually getting everything done 100% right. And that tends to be an issue that keeps in time and time again, whereby it's more difficult to go and fix something when somebody's occupying the building. And that's the same at the end of the defects time. So the issue that we deal with the quality side of things is basically having processes in place right the way through the build to monitor. And as Ian alluded to there, there's issues coming down the route, probably not quite applicable, all the applicable in Scotland in terms of building safety act, that will have massive impact on what contractors are expected to do. And whilst the drafting that looks as if it's something to do with the employer, the likelihood is it's going to get passed across the contractor to deliver. And that will effectively mean that they'll have to have processes and means of recording what they're doing to show that they've built things properly, not be relying on opening this up and see what we find. So I think that will do it. But again, as Ian alluded to, those things will cost money. And that is potentially a game changer for wellness, that once people realise how much it's going to cost, the clients are going to do that. We need to be providing the right information, the quality information to allow things to get built. I think part of that is it comes back to this original brief, that if the quality of information and the quantity of information isn't given at the appropriate time, then we end up chasing our tail trying to get stuff out of sequence and such. So, I think it is about changing the culture, and it is a fundamental culture that needs to be changed, and that quality is driven, but it comes at a cost. I saw there's a slogan that such like this. I saw on a wall something that said, quality is not expensive, it's priceless. And that's absolutely right, because if you get it wrong, the cost to go back and fixing it is terrific. And someone's picking that up, whether it's the client long term not getting the building they want, or the contractor that do it, or 9 times out of 10 it's passed down to the subcontractors as well.
And as you say, that this is a critical area of improvement. It's cultural, it's commercial, it's operational skill based. There's so many components to this. We probably don't have time for you to answer how we're going to do that, but are there any fundamental things that need to happen to start us on that road to the...
I think to be fair, once it starts, it's an education process, but starting even educating within the apprenticeship schemes that are out there, is making everybody that's trained as an apprentice know what they're doing is so important from the very first outset, that they're buying into it, that they're trying to produce a quality product.
Yeah.
And that in itself is something that's there. If it's filled at that level, hopefully it feeds through that no one's going to do something that they should be doing. Although we have seen things getting done that shouldn't be getting done, but mainly because someone's putting pressure on for time, or there's a cost involved in it, getting things done cheaper. If they don't change the culture at the front end, if someone says, no, I'm not building something badly, I'm going to do this right, and if I haven't got information, I'll ask for it. That's the only way I can see it get built in right gets through. And then it's also about people monitoring it, not putting pressure on, actually do things the way they're supposed to be done.
Yeah. And a lot of what we're talking about is cultural, of course, and I construction process is complex, involving all different skills, people, and all the rest of it. I sometimes think that a person, if they come on site thinking, well, I'm coming on site to put plasterboard sheeting on a frame, then they're not fully invested in the job. But if they know that their contribution is ultimately, for example, improving the healthcare for the community that this building serves, then that personal investment in the ultimate aim must change the mindset of the way that the work is done.
You would like to think so.
Yeah.
I think that would be something about that actually taking pride in their work, actually doing and delivering a quality product at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, nobody gets up in the morning thinking, I'm going to go to work to do a bad job.
No.
But equally, it's important to encourage everybody why it is they're going to work to do a good job, because there is a much bigger picture than just what they are doing themselves.
And the old argument that we need to get people in the industry building a job and having pride in their work. That's something we actually need to get through humanity, I think, to have pride in what they do and what they can do. But they need to get that pride. But I think one of the big problems that we've got is that our industry is driven by cheapest price.
Yeah.
And we need to get away from that, because everybody always wants, well, let's get the lowest price. So contractors are pricing to try and get the lowest price to win the job. So they're trying to get everything down. They're shaving everything all the way. And then that shaving ends up that the guys are on site, maybe want to do a really good job. You do want to do a good job, but the job, you've got to get the student sheets now by tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. No, they really didn't know it needs to be done properly an extra half day or something like that. But they've been told, you're not paid if you don't get finished tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. So they have to just, so then they cut corners. So the pricing, the estimating is cutting corners to try and put things down to get the lowest price, and then you're on site. People, there's just too many corners getting cut throughout our whole industry.
Yeah.
And I do think we have, as an industry, we have to realise that if we want quality, we have to pay more. And we just have to pay more, really, because money filtering down will help overall.
Yeah.
But people have to see that money is for reward.
And it's getting back to the transparency of understanding the full picture, and that starts with the quality of the brief and the scope. That somebody can then say, well, we fully understand what you're trying to achieve, how you're articulating that, therefore it will cost this. And for that presentation back to be fully detailed, so if it is 10% higher than the next, there's clarity as to why it should be that cost. And again, with the quality and clarity of the initial brief and scope, then if that brief and scope is entirely representing what the client is ultimately trying to achieve, and there is equal clarity with what goes back in the tender, and if it is 10% more expensive, then that is the right price for achieving those outcomes. And again, it's back to that position of being in a position of knowledge and understanding, and then decisions can be made. If the client doesn't have an extra 10% to get exactly what has been set out, then at least there can then be a discussion around saying, okay, well, we can change certain aspects. And again, reflect that in an equally detailed response. Or it may be, no, these are the requirements, and there has to be a different way of budgeting for that. And again, it's back to the quality of the early stage work and the being able to streamline everything that comes after that from that detailed work at the front end.
Yeah, because we're often in the back foot because the initial work is not done properly. So everybody's trying to catch up, all the way along, and then it just gets worse and worse. The motivation goes out of the job, the pride goes out of the job, the profit goes out of the job, and it's just, oh, let's get this job finished and get away. So much more time spent up front on the tender documentation, I think, would be a great improvement.
Ian, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think they're all excellent points. I think one of the key things for me, and messages of hope here, is that the Building Safety Act is I think is a force for good, and it picks up a lot of the points that have been mentioned. So the competence of the individual is key. So it's focused very much around the CDM, the construction design and management regulations, and it emphasises that importance of design management. So this is how we manage design liability through the supply chain is critical. Picks up on Janey's point about the specific, people don't go to work to do a bad job, but they do need to know what the job that they're doing is. And this is about getting that design, a lot of things get categorised as workmanship issues, but what they really are is site fixes. They're compensating for a poor design, and somebody's effectively on the construction side, and the best practice guide covers this, is becoming an accidental designer. So you're encountering something you didn't expect, you're designing a workaround, and then that becomes a variation, and that also becomes a liability that's often not picked up. So one of the things that we're really trying to focus on to enable change is really trying to make sure that we push that design, that we're very clear on design responsibility through the contractual chain. And again, so if you think about the Building Safety Act, we've got deemed competent roles of duty holders of being principal designer and designer. Now, I'd really urge people to have a look at the descriptors, the explanations of what they are within law now, because they're legal duties. The principal designer is there to coordinate the design. If you're carrying out design works, you have a legal obligation to report to the principal designer if you fear that your works may be non-compliant or the works that interface with you may be non-compliant. And again, for us, that's where a lot of the issues come. It's not so much of the individual products and how they're installed, it's how they're interfaced. And this is something, again, I think we really need to sort of major on. So looking at how CDP's managed, contractor design portion is managed through the contractual suite is critical. Making sure you understand what the design sign-off process is. Because I know through our own research, what we tend to find is that the contractors are under pressure because of all the liquidated damages and other problems that we've described. They're left with a problem on site, and they'll raise that problem, but they won't necessarily get the response from the required party in time. But the program's driving, so the work gets done, and that responsibility is assumed. Again, within the Building Safety Act, we start to see that the hard stops being put in. There's notifiable and major changes that the building safety regulator needs to be informed about before work can continue. And again, that's instilling, as though that doesn't cover every type of building, the principles do, and that's starting to instill that good practice. If we've got a design change, we need to make sure that's coordinated effectively through that principal designer. And again, I come back to some of the things we talked about earlier. It's about how should we be managing this from tender stage? So if we as a specialist contractor are receiving a pack with an awful lot of information to digest and not an awful lot of time, we're going to be given a set of details that effectively handed down to us, some of which we can sign off as saying, look, that's a compliant detail, that's covered within the white paper, the spec, whatever it is. We can demonstrate that performance, no problem at all. We're then going to be left with a load of stuff that's probably interface related details that are questionable. And that, at that point, we can't guarantee we've got a confirmed compliant detail to fill that void or whatever it is. And at that point, that's where we should be going back to the contracts and saying, well, that's actually should be put in as a provisional sum, because there's a cost of compliance that might be, at the moment, that detail on the paper looks okay, but we've got to go back to the manufacturers to see if there's additional test evidence available because it's not covered within the published scope. We might require a fire engineer to come and look at that detail for us and make an assessment. And again, there's formal processes to do that now, but that comes at a cost. We may even have to test that. We may even have to do an ad hoc test in order to demonstrate compliance in that detail. And again, the Building Safety Regulator has got the right to request tests to be completed. So we're not, so all of these things which have kind of been wrapped up and rolled over are really hard stop costs of compliance there. Because again, if you've thinly priced a job, now you've got to pay for testing of an interface detail that you've by accident assumed the responsibility for. That's a big cost for people to start to consider, and it's also unreasonable to foist that through the supply chain. So again, I think this sort of principle, we've got the plan of works, but the plan of works isn't ever really effectively referenced in the contracts. It makes statements around, specialist contractors will do a lot of the design development work, and it references design responsibility matrices. But again, these aren't always clearly provided through the design responsibility matrix is seldom provided as a clear and unambiguous document that forms part of a contractual suite that makes it abundantly clear who's responsible for what. So again, if you took an internal petition hitting an external detail, and you assume as a specialist contractor building the internal petition responsibility for that interface detail, you could be taking responsibility for the entire facade as well as your own package, because that detail is an interfacing adjoining detail. So if it fails, what you're responsible now for is way beyond what it's reasonable to expect you to take responsibility for. And again, all of these costs of compliance come with potential delays. So if there is an intervention from the SCR in Scotland or from the building safety regulator or building control officer, and that causes a delay, again, who's paying for that delay? If you've assumed that design responsibility, it's you. That's in you on your contract. And so these things, which I think, the process was, we rolled over these things and they kind of got done, and then building control effectively signed things off at the end with a load of caveats to say we didn't really spot anything. And these things are covered up, and the world moves on. Now the process requires far more. There's far more opportunity for the regulators to scrutinise the work, which means these details are going to be picked out as live issues, not just issues if there is a building failure. So the cost is much more real and material now of compliance. I think that's something we've got to start recognising early at tender stage to ensure that we're not sort of signing up to fixed price works, which may have major implications in terms of cost of compliance and delay. And so that's the message we're really trying to get out there. And this comes back to what Len said. There's a responsible no here. One of the things about the Building Safety Act is, are you competent to do that? How do you demonstrate your design competence? Because if you're not competent to do the design, you've got to provide statements to say you are. How are you going to evidence that? But this is where the design needs to be principal designer coordinated to ensure that expertise is taken into account, but responsibility is not dumped. I think that's the key thing. You engage the expertise at the right time, but you can't just foist all that responsibility onto those. And again, I come back to the point we mentioned earlier. If you've not got the competence to do the design, you've not got the insurance to do the design, the right thing to do is say no. The right thing to do is say no and ensure that there's a process, a protocol in place that supports evidencing a compliant design, because that comes back to why have we got variations? Well, it's because things were missed. We're doing work that nobody expected to do. Okay, some of them are environmental, some of them are circumstantial, but some of them are just poor design. But now we're on the construction site looking at it, we realise it doesn't work in the real world. And that's the stuff that we've got to get better at. And I'm saying it serves nobody if we're not insured to do that work. Ultimately, that building is not insured. The process isn't insured, and the client doesn't benefit from all of this professional indemnity insurance that hasn't been paid out for, but is so heavily endorsed. So our sort of simple message is check your design liability, clarify your design liability, ask to see a design responsibility matrix, check that your responsibilities are clear on it, and ultimately confirm with your insurer that you're covered for that. Because if not, the client has a huge problem. And again, the Building Safety Act, the CDM element starts with client suitable time responsibilities to do the work. It's their job to make sure it's being coordinated properly, and they're appointing competent people to support them in doing that. They can't just dump it on the supply chain now.
Thanks, Ian. That's some good advice there. I'd like to, we're getting towards the end here. I'd like to